Well, thank you so much, Pipa, for that generous and kind introduction. And thank you, Katie, for your presentation. As a recovering Farm Bill lobbyist, I certainly enjoyed that. But as Pipa was alluding to, I'm going to talk about policy from a different angle, namely the private sector, and what the private sector can do to shape and influence and implement policy. And in particular, I'm going to talk about a public-private partnership called the Conservation Infrastructure Initiative. And we lead that Conservation Infrastructure Initiative with IDALS, the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. And very central to conservation infrastructure are the concepts of farmer profitability and ROI and economics. So we tried to lead with that. And we also have some other strategies that involve engaging the private sector, including market-based solutions, public-private partnerships. And then later on in the presentation, I'll talk about some future policy opportunities for the private sector. But I'd like to start just by saying how important those public sector programs are, whether it's USDA or through the state legislature. And those programs from NRCS, FSA, and through the states have been very effective at reaching the innovators and early adopters of conservation practices. But last I checked, those programs are reaching only about 7 to 10% of the farmers and acres in Iowa and throughout the nation. So the Conservation Infrastructure Initiative is very much geared to how can we reach the other 90% of farmers, those middle and late adopters. And of course, working through the private sector is really key to that. So why the Conservation Infrastructure Initiative? Well, first of all, for those of you not familiar with the Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance, we were created almost 6 years ago to improve the pace and scale of farmer-implemented water quality efforts. And we're very much organized around something called the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. And Iowa and 11 other states in the Mississippi River Basin have nutrient reduction strategies with the same goal of reducing the nitrogen and phosphorus losses by 45%. So when IWA was created by Iowa Corn, Iowa Soybean Association, and Iowa Pork, it was envisioned that we would help to coordinate and implement the private sector component of that nutrient reduction strategy. So we've created the conservation infrastructure as a public-private partnership to help us do that. One of the things we've done is identify the barriers that prevent us from scaling up from our current level of conservation practices to that exponentially greater level that we need in order to successfully implement the nutrient reduction strategies. So we have a number of solutions to overcome those barriers. And very importantly, harnessing economic drivers and market-based solutions is part of that. And if we're successful, we'll be able to create a lot of jobs and economic development opportunities for rural communities and cities alike as we do so. So let's start by talking about cover crops. We've really made phenomenal progress in Iowa. Just a decade ago, we only had 10,000 acres of cover crops that were cost shared. Depending on which estimate you use, we have between about 1 million and 2 million acres today. That 973,000 estimate was from NASS after their 2017 census. And they found that Iowa had expanded cover crops faster than any state at about 156% over the 5-year period between the censuses. So that's really good progress. However, it's not nearly the progress we need. You know, we actually need 50 to 70% of our 24 million acres of row crops in cover crops to successfully implement the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. So we need closer to between 12 million and 17 million acres of cover crops. Now, unfortunately, there's some missing infrastructure, in particular with the private sector and businesses that prevent us from scaling up from where we are today to where we need to go. So for starters, there's not enough cover crop seed in all of the United States to meet just Iowa's future anticipated demand. So that's a problem, but with that problem comes some opportunities. You know, for instance, we'll be able to get many more farmers growing their own cover crop seed. And of course, as we're doing that, we're going to need a lot more cover crop seed cleaning businesses. That's an opportunity to create jobs. We're going to need a whole lot more custom cover crop applicators. We're going to need the ag retail sector more engaged and engaging their channel distribution partners on cover crops. And of course, the transportation sector. And we're going to need a lot more equipment, things like drills for cover crops, high clearance interseeders like our partner Hagee Manufacturing produces here in Iowa, and also aerial equipment to fly on cover crop seeds. So as we're addressing those infrastructure barriers, we'll be able to create jobs and economic development opportunities. Breeze through this in the next few slides, but suffice to say, too often, sustainability efforts really focus on the environmental and the social piece, and we really need to make the economics more front and center. You know, when you have a three-legged stool, but one of those legs is really being gnawed away at by different forces like low commodity prices, tariffs, trade wars, COVID, and lessened demand, the entire stool can come crumbling down. So it's really incumbent upon us to create more win-wins that are not only on the environmental and social side, but also on the economic side, particularly as that pertains to farmers. And one area, slides aren't advancing. One area where that's been done very successfully is fertilizer management, an area that has had more mixed results that's so key to improving soil health is cover crops. You know, we have a number of anecdata, as I like to say, or individual business cases where individual farmers are showing improved ROI through cover crops. But we don't have enough data. You know, we need a more solid case of what some are calling actuarial data to prove out cover crops as a win-win. There's great evidence of how farmers are improving their economic benefits when cover crop systems are grazed. But we need more farmers to have more robust record keeping to help prove out those economic benefits. I know that's something that the Soil Health Institute is working on. For folks like myself who are kind of out in the trenches, we really need to be armed with that economic information to help advance and scale up cover crops. Another example of practices that really have no economic benefit for farmers inherently would be edge of field practices like wetlands, bioreactors, saturated buffers. These practices are expensive. They take land out of production. They do nothing to improve yield or profitability. So here we need, in addition to public sector cost share, we need to have new revenue streams, and payments for ecosystem services is one promising market-based solution that would provide that. So you'll see a number of companies on the screen that you're familiar with that are creating platforms whereby credits are created and buyers can purchase credits, whether it's for carbon sequestration, reduce greenhouse gas emission, reduce nitrogen and phosphorus loss, biodiversity, or others. Another important market-based solution is to link soil health and land valuation. Some of you who were at the Soil Health Summit in New Mexico a couple years ago will recall that my colleague Jim Jordahl tried to sell you a used truck. And that's a metaphor for buying farmland without enough information. If you only had a picture of a truck that was 40 years old, you weren't allowed to see that truck. You couldn't look under the hood, and you couldn't find out how many miles were on that truck. You wouldn't really be able to make an informed bid. And until we have more information for farmers about soil health and soil fertility, they're also not getting the complete picture as to the potential value of that farmland. There's a number of efforts that I'm sure everyone on the call is familiar with. whether it's Cornell and ARS or SMAF or those of the Soil Health Institute, to arrive at a widely accepted soil health metric that could be tailored to every growing region in the US. If we're able to do so, that will be transformational. That will likely be more important than any single policy effort coming out of Congress, because that'll send the right market signal to landowners to adopt practices or insist that their renters adopt practices like cover crops, no-till, strip-till, which can improve soil health, but also make their land more valuable at auction. So that would create a virtuous cycle. And of course, that would have impacts on resilience and things like risk and crop insurance that I'll talk about later. Another very promising market-based solution is subfield scale profitability analysis. Here on the screen, you'll see a field where the red areas are areas within the field that lose money 4 out of 5 years. And oftentimes farms have between 3 and 20% of their acres that lose money. Sometimes that's due to a hydrologic reason. Sometimes that's due to a soil health reason. But if we're looking at programs like CRP or EQIP and taking those acres that lose money out of production, putting them into a farm bill program, we can go from losing $300, $400, $500 to making $300 per acre. And you can see what that will do for a profit, ROI, and total profit for the field. Also, I wanted to point out how the private sector is leading in the space of cost share. We've got companies like Unilever and PepsiCo that are working with aggregator partners like Cargill and ADM to provide private sector cost share for farmers to implement cover crops. So we're seeing that at crush plants for soybeans that both Cargill and ADM operate, and also a corn sweetener plant that Cargill operates in Eddyville. For farmers who have never tried cover crops before, they can get $40 per acre. For repeat users, $10 per acre. But it's really great to see that supply chain leadership, and that's helping to create a push-pull dynamic for farmers to adopt cover crops. Public-private partnerships are, of course, a key strategy to the Conservation Infrastructure Initiative. Building on Katie's remarks about the Regional Conservation Partnership Program in Iowa, IWA is helping to lead 2 such programs, one of which, the Midwest Ag Water Quality Partnership, is a $50 million program that's already improved conservation on more than 3.5 million acres. That includes about 500,000 acres of cover crops. We're actually looking to renew this project, and hopefully it'll become a $100 million RCPP project. Thanks to USDA, we just got approved for another RCPP project. This one is a $33 million project. And here we're looking to integrate drainage management and upgrades to that, tiling and drainage districts. We're looking to integrate that with both in-field management practices and edge-of-field practices, and take a systems approach whereby we can help farmers and landowners improve yields and profitability, but we can also reduce nitrogen and phosphorus loss, sequester more carbon, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we're very excited about this new public-private partnership that should get under contract with NRCS in the next month and a half. And I did want to talk about future policy opportunities. Pippa mentioned the growing climate solutions legislation. That has bipartisan support. 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats introduced it, including Senator Braun from Indiana and Senator Stabenow from Michigan, both on the Senate Ag Committee. That would establish oversight for these nascent carbon markets and really provide more transparency to those markets and more assurances for farmers and foresters regarding those markets. And it would even provide a USDA certification for some of those platforms. And also, as Katie was talking about, there's going to be some major opportunities in the next Farm Bill regarding crop insurance and reforming the risk management title. So just imagine if farmers were rewarded for adopting practices that improve soil health, like no-till, like cover crops. There's a great argument to be made that as farmers are adopting those practices that make their operations more resilient, they should be rewarded for that and therefore get a higher share of the subsidy for their crop insurance premiums as a result. So we need more actuarial data, as I was indicating earlier, regarding how those conservation practices impact risk and resilience. But I think we're headed in that direction. And lastly, I will just end on a challenge to everyone on this webinar to think about how you can position farmer economics front and center in whatever conservation practice or product or strategy you're trying to promote. But it's very important that you help to provide these win-wins, you know, not just for soil health and water quality, but for farmer economics. So with that, I'll stop and see if there's any questions. But back to that question that was asked of Katie, there are definitely conservation compliance hooks in the Farm Bill. Swamp Buster and Sod Buster are two of them. Back in the 2014 Farm Bill, conservation compliance was recoupled with crop insurance. So farmers can't access crop insurance subsidies or conservation practices or other Farm Bill programs without being compliant with Swamp Buster and Sod Buster. So that was an important change. But People was absolutely right that there's not federal legislation regarding numeric nutrient criteria or TMDLs, but we are seeing some states advance that at the state level.